Welcome everyone to this week's Roundtable. It's so good to see everybody. Today we're talking about intuition, and I think it's gone a little bit mainstream. Some of the conversation we'll have is about a Harvard Business Review and how business leaders are using intuition in their analysis with big data. Psychology Today talks about studies they've done about intuition. So intuition is a topic of discussion more common than perhaps it was before. So here we go. Thanks for joining us. Let's get into our slideshow, and then we'll go around and our coaches will chat with you about what they think about intuition. Okay, here we go. Woohoo! So here's a person meditating, and there's a reason for that. And the world that's available to them using their intuition. Okay, here we go. So as a way to have different jumping off points for our conversation today, the number one way in my research for this week's roundtable to enhance your meditation, enhance your intuition is meditation. Sitting down in the silence, learning to meditate. They also mention mindfulness, that as you note the thoughts that go by, as you know the feelings that come up, you have a sense of what is that about? What is the source of that? That can be a feeling of intuition also. So meditation and mindfulness. Some people call it a gut feeling or a hunch. That's sort of how they speak about it in the Harvard Business Review, that you should listen to those gut feelings because it's your unconscious mind kind of processing data that's not part of the analysis, but it might be something you remember but haven't quite pulled the memory forward, or you're collating and doing some pattern recognition that's not linear laid out in your, normal cognitive thinking. Some people call intuition an innate knowing or inspiration. Some people that work on intuition frequently or have developed a good facility for it can call it a download. Some people feel clear insight. One of the studies that we show in the research in the show notes talks about different people interface with their intuition differently. So I have a client who does a lot of body work, and the first sign of intuition for her is an actual feeling in her solar plexus. She gets a feeling like this is good, this is bad, there's a tightening, there's a relaxing. That's her first sign that she needs to be paying attention to what she's about to do or what's going on for her right then. And then some people use muscle testing or other ways for the body's intelligence to confirm, yes, your intuition is on the right track. So there are some things we'll add to the discussion. And now the meme portion. So here's Baby Yoda, an empath about to walk into a crowded room. Grizzled old Yoga 15 minutes later. Yoda having come into a busy room. Then there's a cartoon above. Empaths be like, there's a hurt in my heart chakra and I don't know whose it is. Deja vu is a new term, the feeling of having heard this crap before. And then finally, I like this last one. You wonder sometimes if your higher self was driving you into this life, what in the world were they thinking? Here it is. My life is a fairy tale, but the author is German. So maybe there's a lot of drama in my fairy tale. Okay, so with those ideas in mind, Brian, you might have some thoughts about intuition. Share them with us.
Yeah, so I wrote down some things here and I'm kind of just going to riff off it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it might be kind of weird, but we like to do that here. So So I'm going to compare intuition to logic a little bit.
Mm,
And I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize about logic. It really only works when you're in a completely closed system
mm,
and you have complete information. So it works great for like computers. Like you know the entirety of the code, right? You have
mm,
a complete data set. You know the full operating system. You know how all the, computer chips work in the machine, with all the logic circuits. So you have a closed reality. So you have a complete data set. So within that data set, your logic can be perfect. You can know exactly how things are going to function. But the thing is, life is not like that, right? We are missing tons of information about reality, especially if you start talking about different dimensions, different worlds, the afterlife, all this kind of stuff. I mean, then we just have like a minuscule little tiny bit of information. So how could we ever know about those things? The only way is through intuition or through connecting to God or spirit. There is no other access. I mean, you simply don't even have information to reason with. Like, that's the thing about logic. You have to have initial information to start your reasoning from. If you don't have that, there's simply no access. Like you would only be able to get intuitive access to these types of things. Um, so that's where intuition is completely superior. You can get knowledge without needing a complete data set, without
mm,
needing complete information. And so intuitive knowledge is a real thing. So I'm going to give you an example. So I had a friend who I met, and he wasn't like a deeply spiritual guy. Maybe he meditated a little bit, but he said he just absolutely knew the moment that his marriage was over.
mm,
Like he's just like, it just hit me like I know for sure this is done now. So what I'm getting at here is even normal people or regular people, even if you don't have faith or a spiritual practice, like this is actually a human thing
mhm,
to tap into these types of experiences where you just know something and you know that you know. You have no idea how you know, but you just know something and you know that you know. And that is absolutely how it is. And you just know that. So it's actually a human thing. Humans have these experiences, even apart from having a certain religious understanding of it or doing spiritual practices. Those things can activate it more for sure. But it's actually a human thing. We're all connected to the divine in some way, even if we're not trying to accelerate our connection to it. Which brings me to another point. Like, I think it's important that people understand that there really is no true separation from anything, really, in my perspective. So, what I'm also saying is you can't actually truly separate intuition and logic. Within logic, there's many intuitive steps. People tend not to see this, but that is there. There's also many assumptions. And that's what you're taking for granted. You're sort of like using that almost as a substitute for intuition. Logic sort of functions like given this assumption, what conclusion would we get to if we reason from there? So you have to have a starting first premise, right? And you reason based off that. And the idea is if you have valid reasoning based off of your first premise, you'll get to a true conclusion. But it's only true if your first premise is true. And it's only true if your reasoning processes are valid from there. So those are actually like huge problems that exist in logic, although it can be very useful. Um, but if you think of the example of like oil and water, right? So the oil will float to the top, and we can say, okay, it separates from the water. The truth is, it's actually still not separate from the water. It's still floating on top.
mm,
So I'm suggesting this is how life is. So even if you have two, like, quote unquote, separate objects, they're still connected through space. They're still connected through the air. As they're getting into experiments with quantum entanglement and stuff like this, everything is connected on the quantum level.
mhm,
I mean, like they've proven this experiment. They can make one. the spin of one electron, they can connect that to the spin of another electron, which is at any other distance. And if they change the spin on one, it changes the spin on the other, right? So separation is more of something that we perceive and we kind of believe in the physical experience, but intuition and logic are connected. It's inherent, they're inherently part of each other. So in my opinion, the heart thinks and the mind feels. There's no true separation. Just like you have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of your brain, they're still existing in one brain. They're not truly separate. I mean, they're still interconnecting. Um, so intuition is part of everything we do. And we also have some reasoning in part of everything we do. Like, we sort of had this weird period of kind of Western culture or Western philosophy where we were kind of trying to say, no, we can figure out everything through science. We don't need intuition. That's mumbo jumbo. It's kind of BS.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it's been part of it the whole time. You really can't truly separate out these things. And there's implicit assumptions in every set of reasoning. So you really can't get away from that. Um, so let me see here. Yeah, so one thing I find interesting is there's something called acquired savant syndrome. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but these are cases where someone gets brain damage and they actually develop an ability from that brain damage experience. There's cases of people who, after brain damage, they can actually speak a different language that they never learned in their lives. This has actually happened. It's quite rare, but this has happened. There's been cases of people get brain damage, and then after that, they can suddenly remember what day of the week any date in any year was. And they remember what the weather was. And they remember what they did that day. So they can tell you, okay, June 6, 1972, that was a Tuesday. It was slightly rainy outside. You know, I went and had a sandwich at this restaurant. Like, so what I'm suggesting here is this shows you that like knowledge goes beyond textbook learning or, you know, normal life experiences. You can actually have like brain damage, which taps you into a certain frequency. And then all of a sudden you know things, or all of a sudden you have a new skill. Um, so I'm suggesting intuition works on a similar method. If you connect into certain frequencies of spirit, of reality, of consciousness, you can have a download and you just know something. So this is kind of an example of this, and this is a true thing. There's proven cases of this. Um, yeah, there's people who have had, you know, brain damage and then they have perfect memorization of like a city skyline and they can draw it from memory, even if they only see it for a few seconds. So there's ways to tap into other forms of knowledge or ability. That's what I'm getting at here. And I'm saying that's intuition is similar to that. It's the same type of phenomenon. Um, and I do think as we sort of evolve and move forward as a species, we need to develop more respect for this form of knowledge, like intuitive knowledge, like knowledge that can come through prayer, through meditation, through, you know, tapping into certain frequencies, through whatever way you do it, even through, you know, manifestation practices, things like this. Like there's a case of, he's known as an Indian mathematician, but he really wasn't a mathematician. So was the guy named Ramanujan. He put forward entire mathematical formulas and he really didn't even care about math. And they were correct. They've been studying them for over 100 years and they realized his formulas are correct. And they said, how did you do this? Like he didn't even have a mathematical training or education. He was like, well, I worship an Indian goddess and she just sends these things through me. That's how I know, that's how I have this stuff. And it was correct, mathematical formulas. He was actually writing down mathematical formulas that describe how black holes function before they knew black holes existed. So what I'm saying is there are genuine forms of knowledge in this arena, kind of in the mystical, arena, in the intuitive arena. And I'm suggesting over time we're going to have to learn to like respect these things
Mhm.
and be like, yeah, that's a real thing. Like there's people who are doing that. There's already people who have done that, but we've sort of swept it under the rug. We've like ignored it. Like, no, no, that's just some crazy story. No, there really are people who have done these things, and there's many, many cases if you look into it. I also think we're getting into alternative history here. I also think um, a lot of the ancient temples were set up to facilitate some of these experiences.
Mhm.
So they've gone in and shown that a lot of the ancient temples had a lot of resonance with certain sound frequencies where it
Mhm.
would kind of echo and vibrate throughout the chamber walls. And so you would have like a priest class who could go in there. I mean, I can't prove this, but I'm just suggesting this may have happened. You would have a priest class who would go in there. These frequencies would be resonating. It would take them to a certain state of consciousness where they could access intuitive downloads or where they could sort of leave their body and go visit other realities or other dimensions, other worlds, and gain knowledge and come and bring that back to the people. So I'm saying like a lot of these things are actual real forms of knowledge, including intuition.
Mhm.
Um, and that's my tirade. So
Okay. I have two thoughts, and then I'd love to go to Angela next. The first one is I think a lot of us have like an everyday intuition. We're thinking of someone and then they call us, or we pick up something for someone and they say, I was just thinking about trying that brand of something. Oh, well, I thought of you at the store and I'm bringing it over when I come see you. So sometimes there's just this everyday small connections of intuition and we just kind of comment it almost like it's a coincidence. But there's a YouTuber named Michael Jaco who was a SEAL Team 6 person. And in the military, they have PSI war, Psi war, techniques. They teach remote viewing, but they're on the lookout for people that have that extra sensory perception of when danger is heightened or which direction to go. And in his little group of SEALs that he operated with, they learned that in dangerous situations, they should turn to Michael and say, are we going left or going right? And he just knew we go left. And so they never questioned it because he was right always. And so he had that extra sense of how we stay alive as we go left right here. Oh, okay, we plan to stay alive. We're going to go left. Michael says go left. Eventually, he moved into other kinds of uses for this natural ability that he had. But when you're in a difficult situation, you have to depend on one another. Sometimes that extra, advantage that you have is what you want to use. And in the military, there are stories of people who say, yeah, I don't know why, but I think this is what we have to do next. And it turns out they're right. So I think we all have more experience than maybe we realize. Angela, do you have some thoughts on intuition?
So funny, I did some research way back when I was doing a video for Life Designed,
Mhm.
Introduction to Intuition Discernment. And I came across, and it's just one video, it's like, I don't know, 16 and a half minutes long. It's not very long, but I came across, and you would probably know this, Brian. I don't know what post-integral philosophy is. I came across a guy who is a post-integral philosopher. And because I have known for a long time that intuition is different than thought, we have a lot of voices in our head, right? We have a lot of voices and talk, self-talk, of course. And I've known for a long time that there's a difference between intuition and just basically self-talk and what we think, so to speak. So I was trying and I've always interpreted that intuition is what I came up with this term, but here it is. This guy has it on his website. It's translogical. So coming off of what you were saying, Brian, on those same lines as well, which is there's logic, which is the rational thought, and you use your senses. I perceive it because I see it, I hear it, I touch it, I smell it, I taste it, so forth. And then there's translogic, which is where it transcends your logic. You just know, and you don't know why you know, but you know it, like you said. right? And so this guy actually, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but because I will murder it. But he talks about the translogical nature of intuition and what it is in this article on his site. And I was like, yes, there it is. It's the power or faculty, and we all have this power or faculty actually, of attaining to direct knowledge or cognition without evident rational thought or interference or inference. And then he says it's immediate apprehension or cognition. Intuition is direct knowing without rational or sensory process. Intuition is nonlinear mode of functioning and is a way of experiencing everything at once and not splitting it up into linear chains of cause and effect. So, and when he described it this way, it was like, that's it. That's the way it feels like. That's what it comes across as. So when you have an intuitive inspiration. It doesn't come to you in words. It doesn't come to you in a linear thought process. It's a flash of knowing, a flash of insight all of a sudden. He goes on to talk about how important this has been. He says, if intuition is identical to clear knowing, then it is extrasensory perception. Intuition is fundamental in the development of philosophy, mathematics, and science. And so he goes on to give examples of Kekuli, who comes up with the benzene molecule after he dreams about the snake eating its, chasing its tail chain that the benzene molecule follows. He has an example of Poincare and his intuition about theta functions. He has these different things. And so it got me to thinking, well, Einstein, when he comes up with theory of relativity and he imagines he's running alongside a sunbeam to the end of the universe. So they have these imaginings and they come as flash of insights of knowing. Sometimes it can be visual, but intuition does not show up in words. That's a brain function. That's what your brain does. That's specifically what the left hemisphere of your brain does, which is having this words to describe things. So what happens is you have a flash of insight, you have a flash of intuition, and then your mind, your thoughts go to work trying to analyze it and make it try to be logical. It isn't always, but that's what's going on. And in my video that I was creating for A Life Designed, I was really wanting to point out the discernment between what we consider as our animal instincts, the instincts we have that drive us make decisions based on, feel like I'm being stalked by the saber-toothed tiger, I'm in danger, or I shouldn't get on the elevator with that person, I'm getting a creepy vibe here. Those instincts of survival versus the egoic conditioned responses. Well, I'm going to get on the intuition. I'm going to get on the elevator, even though I think this guy is kind of creeping me out, but I'm going to do it because I've been trained to be a nice person and this is ridiculous. And I'm just going to blow it off and get on. Right. And so there's these overrides that we have that our ego will put on, and we'll also have a lot of things that are coming from a subconscious or unconscious level that is from the mental construct that has zero to do with intuition because we are perhaps traumatized or we're conditioned from the perspective of childhood to behave in a certain way when we're confronted with a certain other person's emotion or a particular trigger that usually is external. So when we have these kind of external triggers, well, then we'll go into a particular response mode and we think, we don't even think doing it. We're still just responding. So these are nothing to do with intuition. Intuition has to do with something that actually comes from some other knowing place that you just know it. And how can you know it? Maybe you're tapping into some, I have no idea. Maybe you're tapping into some sort of, record of the universe, right? Everything is maybe recorded. And if there's no past, present, and future, and everything is quantum and the quantum field of possibilities, all this stuff possibly exists, and there's multi-universes and there's parallel universes or whatever, string theory, whatever. Perhaps you're tapping in somehow. Maybe the person who can then suddenly know what happened on such and such day, and their brain is acting suddenly like a computer because of the particular faculty that they're now accessing. That's not necessarily intuition per se. So if you go with the whole sense that there is a part of yourself that is inhabiting this physical form that is divine or other, oversoul, soul, whatever, then what is going on is you're tapping into that, that part, that individuated consciousness that's come into this physical form that also gets the baggage of an egoic personality and the body and its reactions and responses and such. So I really started realizing, from a personal perspective, I started realizing, oh, I was in my career as a recruiter, and I just found myself interviewing people and being able to, sure, you could say I was pretty good at tapping into perhaps their unspoken, nonverbal cues, their communication that was body language, so to speak, maybe especially tuned and aware to people's body language. So if I'm interviewing them, I can pick that up, something else that they're not saying, or they're giving a cue in a subtle way, and I'm in a subtle way picking it up, and then I'm running with it. And I'm doing this sort of thing, and I'm tapping in and asking them questions and getting the truth out of them in these interviews, or getting them to really put their guard down and tell me really what they wanted in this job or this career that they're looking for, etc. And being a third party recruiter at that time, it didn't matter to me if I was recruiting and hiring for one company. I was hiring for a lot of different companies. So when I interviewed somebody, they could ostensibly be placed in company A, B, or C. I just needed to know where they fit. And so for me, I wanted to get to the bottom of it, what made them tick. So there was a lot of things. I was just basically, I had learned things like body language. So I was just pushing it off to that. I was just pushing it off to that. And then I started to really tap in at this other level, and I was listening at this other level that I could only describe as listening at an intuitive level. And it wasn't listening at the level of sensory perception. It was listening at an extrasensory perception.
Mhm.
And the funny, I brought my little pebble here from the monk who painted the Saint Benedict's motto on it, "Open the ear of my heart."
Mhm.
A friend, colleague of mine, a coworker of mine, was going to a retreat in Pecos, New Mexico, to the Catholic monastery there, the Benedictine monastery, and she brought us back gifts, and
Mhm.
they were these painted stones, and these painted stones had painted words on it like peace, love, that kind of thing. But the one that said "Open the ear of my heart" it called me. I'm like, I need that. Because at that time, I had made the specific intention that I really wanted to deepen this connection to intuition and understand the difference. Like, what's the difference? And that was, I don't know, maybe 2003, something like that. And then fast forward to 2008, where I'm actually having a conversation with I accompany a friend, this person who is supposedly a highly intuitive person who communicated with the angels. And as the person is talking, I'm hearing in just bloop. All of a sudden, I know exactly what needs to be said to her by this person who's getting ready who's like in effect counseling her.
Mhm.
And I don't know this person very well, but as she's revealing and talking about her personal life and such, and this person who's, channeling Archangel Michael, and I'm very skeptical, by the way. I'm very skeptical about this. And I'm sitting there, and suddenly I know, like from that intuitive thing, because I've been working on trying to train that part of myself, all right? But all of a sudden, bloom, it came in like I knew what she needed to hear. And as I knew what she needed to hear, he said it to her. Like practically the same exact words,
Mhm.
which then blew my mind because I was thinking, oh, well, can intuition come in as words? Yeah, it can come in as words, like, but all at once. It's not like some logical sequence of thought.
Mhm.
I found myself, Dean, I know you're like all into the journaling. You just did the journaling challenge and so
Mhm.
forth. And I've journaled since I was a little kid. And then I found morning pages with Julia Cameron and her fabulous book on creative recovery, The Artist's Way. And then I started to really lean into doing that. And what I found myself as I learned more and more about the discernment of what my ego, so when I would sit down and I would start writing the morning pages or the journaling, it was my ego wanting to process, analyze, process, blah, 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 blah. And then something would happen, and I would start suddenly feel a shift happen. And then there was this inner intuition, like answer, answer, answer. And it was like as though like I had to get the ego out of the way and let it have its chatterbox. And then as soon as I could like let it run itself out, then what would happen? And the same thing has happened to me in meditation as well. Because when you sit down in meditation, you have the chatterbox, the chatterbox, the chatterbox, thoughts, thoughts, thoughts. So this is why I think the Kriya Yoga breath work that Yogananda was an advocate of course, which gets you focused off of the mind and the thoughts.
Mhm.
And then also transcendental meditation, which focuses on a mantra. So these are sound, right? You either have the breath sound or you have the mantra, right? And that what you were talking about, Brian, about the sound. So the whole point of it is how do you get the mind to just shut the heck up? So that then you can receive or connect to what I think Jesus aptly put, the kingdom of heaven within. And so, if the kingdom of heaven within, that's the source of that intuition.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to do with your bodily senses. You can, though, however, use muscle testing. And in
Mhm.
2008, a fabulous individual I came across, she did a lot of somatic work. You guys know her, her name is Sherry. And she helped me understand muscle testing.
Mhm.
And she just helped me, look, and all of a sudden, I had the conduit, the understanding of how to access it with true discernment. And then one more tip that I have, if anybody is wondering, well, how do I know it's just my thoughts or it's my intuition or whatever? To me, the biggest understanding is that when a thought comes through, your mind is at work. It's usually judgmental. It usually has a I ought to, I should. It has sometimes a fear base. It's usually couched in some sort of a triggering type of thing and whatnot. When intuition comes through, it is neutral. There is no, and by the way, a thought can be also positive, hence positive thinking,
Mhm.
right? Because we can use, and that's great. That's a great the service that the mind and all gives us. But when it comes to intuition, there's no positive or negative. It is what we would call sacred neutral. It
Mhm.
is just, it is. It is what it is, what it is. And it is knowing, and you know it, and there's no judgment, and bloop, here it is.
Mhm.
And there's no, you ought to, and you should. So whenever I tune in these days to hear other like spiritual teachers or other people telling me that their intuition is whatever, if there's a you need to and you ought to and we've got to there's some sort of a sense of a demand
Mhm.
like a capit you've got to follow this and it's a rule or it's a that is not intuition.
Mhm.
Intuition doesn't come in like that.
Mhm.
Intuition is totally it's not even benevolent, it's just neutral. It's
Mhm.
just knowing.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought I would bring today when, within like what, less than an hour's notice, you said, hey, let's
I
get on
know.
a round table and talk about
Jump on a
intuition. I'm
round
like,
table.
I'm
Wow.
talking about intuition. I used to be very much what's the word I'm looking for? I used to try I wouldn't say ashamed of my intuition, but I would say that I have seen it and have been affected by the shaming of you're a woman and you have intuition and you're a man and you're not supposed to have intuition and the gender dis separation
Mhm.
BS. And then just the idea of like I taught women's self-defense classes for a while. And we would tell the women in the class, look, everyone has intuition. You have intuition. You've had the feeling, the sense of something that you can't explain. Like, I shouldn't get on the elevator with this guy. I
Mhm.
just got a bad feeling, right?
Mhm.
And when they interview women who have been abducted or attacked or whatever, many times they'll say, I didn't listen to my intuition. I mean, I cut my finger earlier this year, and right before I cut my finger, I had the intuition that it was getting ready to happen. And it was like like seconds later, bloom, I cut my finger because I wasn't being careful.
Mhm.
So we have the knowing, but do we pay attention? Yeah, I was distracted. I was distracted by my thoughts. I was distracted by the thoughts of how I was going to prepare this potato I was cutting. I was distracted by what was on the TV and the, podcasts I was listening to. And I
Mhm.
was like, but the intuition came, bloop, you should, there's this thing, and yeah. So that's what I wanted to come and share because I've been tr still practicing open the ear of my heart. And when my friend gave this pebble to me, she said, "Oh, that was Saint Benedict's personal motto."
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, I don't know that, but I can tell you it is definitely singing to me." And so, yes, so Saint Benedict, his motto was open the ear of my heart. So there you go. I just thought I would bring that. This isn't exactly woo-woo, though it feels like woo-woo because there's this translogical. But just like Brian was pointing out, it shows up all over math and science. And many mathematicians, many scientists will also attribute their intuition to their discoveries, their breakthroughs to intuition, whether it came through lucid dreaming, whether it came through daydreaming, whether it came to them in a dream or whatever. And I guess one more thing I'll say real quickly is as a person who does art, and it's my piece back there, my little collage that you guys see hanging there. I have found, and this happens to me with poetry. I don't know if it happens to you with writing poetry too, Dean, but when I was a child, I started writing poetry, and when I was a teenager, I just started to be able to cultivate this ability to kind of get my head out of the way. If I tried and I intended, I'm going to write a poetry in this form, a haiku, a sonnet, it has to rhyme this scheme and blah. It was like not very good. But if I moved myself out of the way and then just let my intuition come in, the poem wrote itself. And then I would step back and I would go, whoa, where the hell did that come from? That didn't come from me. That came through me. And a lot of times, artists, musicians, writers, poets, people who, in anything, in creative work, in any kind of creative work, you can be sewing and feel this way, where there's this mixture of I have skill and I tap into a flow state. And flow state is where you spend time and everything. It's still a mental state. You still are using skills. You're still picking up, you're working on a painting or something. You're still figuring out, well, I know something about the color chart and what's a complementary color. And if I'm doing green, I should do purple. Or if I'm doing blue, I should do orange. So you have the knowledge that you've been trained and skilled and your mental capacity has, right? Your skills. And then there's something you do if you're in the flow state that sometimes can happen because you're teetering on that edge of the rational and the transrational or the logical and the translogical that you do something that is inspired, you do something that doesn't make any sense, and then you step back and you go, whoa, that just elevated this. And that did not come from me. It did not come from my thinking, my thoughts. So I feel like even when when you're in the creative mode and you're in the flow state mode, you can then sometimes tap into that intuition. Bill Russell, the famous basketball player from I guess you say the Celtics, whatever, the Boston basketball team. When he was writing in his autobiography, he talked about being in the zone because athletes talk about this, being in the zone. And he said you can be on the basketball court and in a game and you're passing and you kind of, and I think he didn't have the words for it, but I would say, Brian, we would call it quantum entanglement, just like you were talking about, where the electron is spinning this way and it's the way, and then they entangle, right? Well, he was talking about this, but I think from this kind of level of intuitive entanglement, he said you're passing the ball, and your teammates and you are just hitting every shot, every shot, every shot until the spell is broken. And then of course, you might make a mistake or miss a pass or something. He said, but for a moment, for a time suspended moment, you're in this zone where everything is perfect and everything is working. And so it's not like anything new to us. We've always been able to have this, but I think we're in a precedented time where they will not, when you talk this way, put you in a prison, put you on a rack, burn you at the
Ban
stake.
you from the village as a witch.
So anyway, that is the end of my rant.
Fantastic. Dean, one of the things in Psychology Today article was they did a study where they did 10-second clips of professors, and they had students watch a series of 10-second clips and then rate how well that professor was going to be rated at the end of the semester. I
Mhm.
don't know if you've heard
I
this.
do know about this. Yeah.
Yes, and it was just gut feeling or intuition. And so then they compared the ratings at the end of the semester from the actual students that took that professor, and it was right on target. Then they had them try to backwash sort of that intuition or translogical feeling into their rational mind, and they didn't get the same results. They asked people to watch 10-second clips, say, this is going to be rated a 5, this guy's going to be rated a 10, this gal's going to be rated a 7. Then underneath, they asked them to explain why. So now process why you had those feelings, and that's where it fell apart. And
Hmm.
now they're second guessing. They're trying to use their logical mind and they're backwashing their, translogical intuitive feeling. And the two operate separately, but there's this discernment that sort of lets them marry together. I think that's where journaling comes in. When you've seen a sign, when you followed your hunch, the last thing I'll say is there's a link in the research from a skill site where they teach you skills like active listening or effective business communication. One of the skills is developing your intuition so that you can follow your gut hunches when you're in a complex decision. And it goes through steps. One of the steps is journal. You have this that you're thinking, you have this that you're feeling, or that's translogical, and do that sorting in a journal. And the more you practice, the better your discernment becomes automatic. Like this is a knowing that I have, and I'm going to go with it. But if you repeat it over and over in your journal, you realize that is a sign I should follow. That is a gut instinct I should follow. Okay, I turn it over to you, Dean.
Well, I think one of the things we've kind of talked around is that part of just the general growth process for a person is higher and higher levels of integration.
Mm,
And I think it's important to say that intuition is not opposed to rationality. It's not
mm,
I don't want to say it that way because intuition is rational, but
mm,
it's not opposed to a process of logic.
mm,
That there's no um, inherent conflict between a kind of sudden, unmediated knowing and arriving at a conclusion through a process of thought. They're not enemies, right?
mm,
They are both aspects, both critical aspects of human flourishing. I
mm,
think the point Brian is making is very important is that um, we kind of have lived in a materialistic, positivistic culture or whatever that sort of wants to pretend that half of us is all we need, and
mm.
that
Just on
that
one side of the brain. The other side of the brain is just a waste of headspace.
right, and so that part and the advantage of journaling there is to allow yourself a physical process, I would think, through which to do that integration.
Mhm,
And so, when when you're an intuitive person, a lot of your inner life is about integrating that around into language, etc. Because sometimes when you have an intuitive knowledge about what you should do, it actually involves other people. Like you have to communicate, you still have to communicate to them. You still have what you're doing still has to be in some sense sensible or intelligible to them, etc. And because you can't achieve your goals all by yourself. And so that process of integrating those parts of yourself, that complex knowing is is critical, and it's critical not to see them as enemies, but as mutually useful tools.
complementing one another.
I
Mhm,
think well, what this is not directly about journaling, but I think sort of in terms of just talking about that, I think what we have to kind of understand is that intuition is like Brian was saying, intuition is deeper. It becomes the bedrock on which our rational analytic mind might work.
mhm.
And and the problem becomes, I think, is that a lot of people just don't have that part of themselves developed at all. And so it kind of goes with what Angela was saying too, is I think in terms of it's helpful to me to think of into the difference between intuition and desire.
Mhm.
Like, what is the difference between saying I'm really being guided by my intuition and saying I'm just a selfish person who just does whatever he wants,
Oh.
right? That like there's a difference, right? Because we all know people who just are driven by their immediate desire and they don't care about other people. So the difference, it seems to me, is that intuition is a process of a different part of yourself, whether you want to call it the higher self versus your lower self, right? The Bible sometimes refers to it as the spirit and the flesh,
Mhm.
that or kind of the soul and the ego. Well, whatever, however we want to make that distinction,
Mhm.
that people who are sort of just driven by their desires, right? Like I I want whatever whatever you're and I want it at irregardless of your expense for you, right? Whatever it costs you, I want this. That is the way, even if we call that intuition, it's really just a kind of passion or desire that's not molded by that sense of the higher part of yourself. And that when you're connected to that and those things are more fully integrated, you have a much more refined ability to articulate between those two things, right? And so um, your intuition does arrive. I think Angela's right. It arrives in clarity and as a knowing that is not, that you don't have any complexity around.
Mhm.
And I think that's a critical way of kind of recognizing it. You just know what's next for you. And I think too that a lot of people remain kind of bogged down in that lower kind of part of themselves, which is driven by panic, driven by um, anger, defensiveness, etc. And this is why they become jerks who just do whatever they want, even though, and because they're grasping. And I think to live into by a kind of higher level of intuition, you you cease to kind of have that inner feeling of grasping at things because you have a higher level of certainty about what's right for you next.
Mhm.
And so part of the way you can discern between what's just an impulse that you have that might be selfish or that would might hurt other people or even hurt you versus what's truly like coming to you from a higher reality is whether it arrives to you as a knowing that calms your system or if you can feel it arising from your own kind of grasping at your whatever you think of as your defenses.
Mhm.
So a good example, somebody who, let's say, somebody who steals money from another, right?
Mhm.
We that he steals money because he thinks at some level more money will keep him safer. It's a defense,
Mhm.
but it hurts his neighbor.
Mhm.
This is not really an intuition because it comes um, in a way that keeps him mired in grasping because he can never sort of have enough. And so to live intuitively always comes with a sense of opening, I think,
Mhm.
too. So that's probably helpful in terms of discerning those. And then I just think the process of integrating that with your whole sort of a highly structured, logical, rational approach to life can still be had.
Mhm.
Um, even if you're sort of even if your fundamental decision making process is basically intuitive.
Mhm.
Did I answer what you're asking me?
Yes, you sure
Okay,
did. And journaling can kind of help you tease that out. As
sure.
Angela said, sometimes it's a little surface mind, but then as you get used to journaling, get good at it, spend a little more time at it, you can get down to the bedrock of maybe intuitive feeling or a clear internal direction. I think we represent a team of coaches here. Angela has a course on our free membership site. It's still free for a little while longer. that you can access. And Tanya has done a challenge recently about developing intuition. But if you think you have intuition or you feel like you'd like to develop it, you can come out of the closet now, according to Harvard Business Review, according to Psychology Today, according to skills training website for business people. It's okay now to have intuition and to deploy it in your life. So if some coaching would help you there, we're available to help you do it. But there are simple ways, and we'll go around and get final thoughts. You can put your hand on your solar plexus and just ask yourself the question, do I take the job or not take the job? Do I make that call or not make the call? And go with your immediate feeling. The more you practice using your intuition, the better you get at it. Just like everything that you practice, you get more of, so you get better at. Brian, do you have some final thoughts, and how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think this has been a great discussion. I think everyone's made some really good points. I think this was a very deep discussion of this topic, so hope the viewers enjoy. Um, but yeah, I have some more thoughts. A little bit of sort of what I was saying before. I want to expand on it a little bit. Talking about how things can't be truly separated. I don't think you can be truly separated from God. There has to be some link for you to even be alive.
Mhm.
And in my opinion, consciousness comes from God. You definitely can't explain it as like electrical signals in the brain or something.
Mhm.
I mean, because then if you would run electricity through a corpse, right, wouldn't it reanimate and
Mhm.
be Frankenstein's monster or something? I just don't think those explanations are satisfactory at all. Um, Also, to me, it's obvious that the universe is designed, and design has to come from consciousness. So there has to be some kind of original consciousness, some original being that is aware. I also think it's good for people to think about how could you possibly go from a state of zero awareness to a state of awareness?
Mhm.
Just try to think about how could that possibly occur,
Mhm.
even one time? How
Mhm.
could that ever occur once? If you think about that a lot, I think you'll realize there's an original consciousness which we share in to some extent. And I mean, that's how we're conscious. So, in my opinion, like the Bible speaks to that, in my opinion, with the line, it says something like, man does not eat by bread alone, but by every word uttered from the mouth of God.
Mhm.
So, in my opinion, we're sharing to some extent in that original consciousness which designed everything. And to me, every facet of existence is proof of design. I don't think there's a single one that's not.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, also like different states of intuitive realization, different states of knowing. Also speaking biblically again, I think there's a line, I think it's in Revelations or something, where it says, like at the end of days, every tongue will confess. And I kind of agree with that. I've sort of felt like that's true. Just in my heart, I've sort of felt like that's true for a while. And what I think happens is there's certain levels of intuition or realization that literally are not doubtable.
Mhm.
Like it can hit you in a certain way where you don't have the capacity to doubt it anymore. That's like been removed.
Yeah.
You can't doubt it.
Mhm.
So I mean, not saying I get those or anything, but I mean, I think that is a possible level. I feel like that's a possible level of realization. So, but I would encourage everyone to work on developing their intuitions. I think it's like a cheat code to life. I think it's like a hack
Mhm.
that can make things just flow and just go a lot easier for you. So, in terms of designing your life and having a better life, I think it's very much worth seeing if you can develop your intuition because you can just get spontaneous knowing or guidance, which can really help you in your life.
Mhm.
Especially like as Angela was saying, if you learn to discern, the difference between what's real intuition and what's kind of a substitute of that from your own ego or something like that. Um, I think it's very much worth delving into. And I think humans of the future are going to be taking this more seriously. That's my opinion on that. So
How
I
do we
love that
find
you brought
you?
that up, Brian. I love that you brought up the humans of the future. I don't think it's the humans of the future. I think it's the humans of now and the future.
yeah.
AI is here, artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I like to say that HI is here too, and that's human intuition.
Mhm.
So
Nice, nice. That's
that
a good
is
line. Yeah.
ultimately our superpower, right?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
thing
Yeah.
that we have that artificial intelligence doesn't have. And so, and it is
Mhm.
a distinctiveness in our humanness that we have intuition,
Mhm.
not just intellect, not just a computer brain that can remember the date of something and the weather that day. But I
Mhm.
really think that I love that you brought that up because a lot of people are panicking. Oh my gosh, my job's going to go away. Oh my gosh, this is going to change this. But
Mhm.
at the core fundamental, it is. I saw something Eckhart Tolle was talking about in addressing this, the humans, the evolution of consciousness and the AI question and all of this, and that AI is arriving right in the time that humans really need to be evolving their consciousness. And in the evolution of our consciousness, we embrace this whisper of intuition, which is just the whisper of faculty we actually have. But
Mhm.
as we come more and more into that faculty, as that evolves more and more, it's going to be like we're going to look back on ancient humans and say, wow, they only, like Dean said, used half of themselves. You know? That's what I wanted to add as far as my final thoughts,
That's
Myrna.
good. Well, and I know we can find you on
Yep.
alivedesign.org
Mhm.
on the About page. Did you want to say anything else about how people can find you?
Oh, I mean, you
Yeah.
can find me on my website, but there you go, on the life design too.
Wonderful. And Dean, do you have final thoughts on how people get a hold of you?
I did have some final thoughts a moment ago, but now I have forgotten them. Maybe they'll come back. Intuition, I guess not. People can find me at alifedesign.org, at deanabbott.com, and on Twitter at deanabbott.
Wonderful. Well, we have a team of coaches on the About page at alikedesign.org. Come check us out. We'd love to help you develop this faculty if you want that, so that you have that balance of the logical and the translogical in whatever you're doing in your life. Thanks for being here. We'll see you guys next time.